So after all these different techniques we learned about selections, it's now time to put them to the test. This is not an easy selection. It's something that you can approach again from completely different angles. You can use different set of tools. You can even try to just use one single tool. And every Photoshop user would approach selections slightly differently. But what is common amongst every professional Photoshop user is that they combine selection techniques. So they don't rely on one single solution. And that is what I'm going to demonstrate with this example. So we could try to use the focus area selection, because in this image we have the girl in focus and the background is blurred out completely. We would expect it to do a really good selection, and it does a very good job. But unfortunately, this option is only available in CC. So it's not a universal technique for users who only have previous versions, but I still show it to you. By drawing over her slightly, we get to almost a perfect selection straight away. And it's only a matter of time to refine the hair. This new technique definitely does a good job, but what if we can't rely on this? So I'm just going to cancel out of this. And instead of using focus area, I'm going to start by using channels. Remember what I showed you in the previous example. When we switch between the different channels, we will see the intensity of each color in the image. And what that actually means is that wherever you see bright details, that means we have those colors present there. For example, with blue, the background will completely be dark or very dark because that's the green grass, which will obviously be much brighter when I switch to the green channel. So the brighter a detail is, the more of that color is present in those areas. So if I switch to blue, that is actually the best contrast between the person and the background. So that's what I'm going to use for my selection. I can actually make it even better by increasing the contrast using an adjustment. To do that, I'm going to right-click on this channel and choose Duplicate Channel. That will create the blue copy. So I click OK. That's exactly what I wanted. And then I'm just going to select this turn off the blue channel and go to the Image Adjustments Levels. Remember this adjustment we used in the previous example as well, and we will see the histogram. And if you remember, to increase contrast, we have to drag these 2 points in. But if you are not sure what to do, you can also choose a preset. Let's say increase contrast 3. And you can already see what happened if we turn it off and on with the preview option. That helped to emphasize the difference between the girl and the background. Okay, so that's going to help us with our selection. And we can click OK, or we can still play around with these other options as well, see whether we can make it even better. But I think it did a really good job, so I'm just going to click OK. And then I'm going to switch to the Quick Selection tool. So now that we have a good contrast, I can start using a tool which is going to make the selection based on contrast and color. So if I start drawing over her skin tones, you see that got selected very quickly because that has a really big contrast from the background. Then I go over the dress, and even that got selected nicely. This part as well got selected very quickly. And remember, with the Quick Selection tool, you always draw in the center first and then gently and carefully approach the edges. Especially here around the hair, I will have to go very slowly to make sure it doesn't expand too far out into the background. So I don't want to go further than something like that. Maybe here we can include a bit more, and also maybe on the top we can include slightly more details. And then of course we can always make our brush smaller as well, and then just try to get as close as possible to the edge details. And then once we are close enough, then I think we can move ahead. So that's all I could do with the Quick Selection tool. You can't expect it to be able to select all those fine details on the hair. For that, we are going to use the Refine Edge option. So now that we have our selection, we don't actually need to stay in the blue copy, but we could continue here. It's really up to you whether you want to continue with the color image or stay in the blue copy. I can already click here on the top on Refine Edge, and then we can take it further from the channel that we created with the increased contrast on it, or you could switch back to RGB mode. I am going to stay with this option for now and see whether I can use this to improve the selection on the hair. So like before, I am going to use the brush, the tool that's called Refine Radius tool, and I'm going to just increase my brush size. And I can also change what color I want to see in the background. I think on black is probably the best in our case. And then I'm just going to draw over the hair and try to include all the detail of the hair, and notice how beautifully it improves all the edges. So I'm going to go over all the hair here as well, include everything, and it will reveal all those details that we were losing from the image. So I go over these parts here as well, and then we get a much better selection of the hair. But because her hair is very bright and these details in the background are bright as well, we have to be careful also not to include too much from the background. So for example, here we have a detail which we can remove by alt-clicking on it. And maybe also here we can alt-click on that part. That was a little bit too much. Also here I just selected too much from the background. So refining that actually makes the hair also better, the selection on the hair. And I think this is the most complicated bit here to include in the selection, but I think that's actually worked out quite nicely. So all in all, I like the edge detail. The only problem is that because it's not perfectly selected, it's going to be slightly see-through. So you can probably notice the hair looks a little bit strange, the colors on the hair. Although it's black and white, we can still tell that the intensity of the edge is not as strong as the actual details further inside on her head. So that is something we will have to deal with. But I'm just going to accept the way it is, maybe by adding a bit of smooth option on it, on the selection, just to smooth out the hard edges. Normally the hard edges get a little bit pixelated if you don't use the smooth option, so that's why it's useful. But then we can click on OK, and we will see our selection refined. Once we are ready with that, we can now definitely switch back to the RGB color mode. I mean the RGB channel, that's a composite channel, which includes all three primary channels. And then we go back to the layers panel, and instead of deleting anything from this image, I'm going to show you an even better way of applying your selection, and that is to save it as a layer mask. And this is going to be our next big topic, masking. So to create a layer mask, you can click on this icon here at the bottom of the layers panel. I call this the Japanese flag because that's how it looks, but it generally means a hole in a layer. So if I click on that, that is what the layer mask looks like. So it's added next to the image layer as a black and white rectangle, and you can see the effect that it removed the background. Now I'm going to explain this in way more detail, but generally what happens is that the mask is using black and white colors to hide or show details, and if you alt click or option click on the mask's thumbnail, you can actually see how the mask looks like. And you can see that white shows, black hides. That's the main thing about masking. So when I switch back, you can see the white details are visible and anything that's black on the mask is hidden. But the great thing about masking is that you never lose anything that you mask out. So it's still there, and you can try it by shift clicking on the mask. You will see that we still have everything from the background. So it's completely non-destructive. And as a final step to finish off this selection and to improve the selection around her hair, I'm going to add another empty layer. So click on new layer and then drag it underneath this layer. And then let's fill it in with the background color, which in my case is white. So that's Command or Control Backspace. In case you don't have white, you can press D to reset your colors, and then it should be black on the front and white in the background. But we can also press Alt Backspace to switch to black, to fill the background layer with black. Especially on black, we can see that the hair is not perfect because it's slightly see-through. We can even pick a different color just so we can see exactly what I'm talking about, and then press Alt Backspace again to fill the background in with that color. So now we can see it clearly that the hair here especially shouldn't be as see-through. Around the edges it might be okay, but here definitely it's a bit too see-through at the moment. So if I select the mask, there are two very useful tools to improve the mask in these cases, and these are used mainly for retouching, but I like to use them to improve selections as well, and that only works if you are using masks. So that's why I haven't used them so far. But once you start using masks, you can rely also on the dodge and burn tool to refine the edges, especially soft edges like hair. So if I select the dodge tool, that can brighten up details. And if you set the range to highlights and the exposure to a high value like I do, then you can just draw over parts and you can see how much better it looks straight away. And the magic is that it's not going to reintroduce the background, because on the mask those details were black already. So let me show you this in the mask view. I just went back and I show you what happens within the mask. If I draw over this detail here, you can see that the dodge tool will only brighten the already bright details. So if I go along the whole image, that does a really good job at brightening up the details that we need without brightening the background. Okay, the background also got slightly brighter on some parts, but generally this will work on the hair detail. So we can even go over there. Now if we alt click to see what happened, we can see that the top bit looks perfect. Only problem we have is here. But for that, we switch to the other tool, the burn tool, which can darken details. But if it's set to shadows, that again work exactly the opposite as the dodge tool. So it will darken anything that's already darker compared to the other details. So if I paint over this bit here, you can see we still maintain the hair and only hide the green colors from the original background. So if I switch back to the mask view by alt clicking on it, we can do the same thing here, and you see how nicely it filters out just what we need to hide. So just simply painting it over until you get a very nice edge selection. Then I can alt click on it again, and look at that. I mean, that is a very nice selection on the hair. So no matter what background we would use, we will have a very good selection on the hard edges and also on the soft edges. Of course, you should always double check. Like here around the lips, I can see problems. So we actually miss a bit of detail from her lips, and also there's a bit of detail from the background visible there. But thanks to masking, we can even use the brush tool, which draws with black and white. So if I just switch to a default hard edge brush like this one, and I just make my brush size slightly smaller, then what we can do is decide whether to draw with black or white. So if I draw with black on the mask, and it's important to have the mask highlighted, then I can remove those details. But just as easily, if I switch to white, remember you can press X on the keyboard to swap colors, or just click on the little arrow here in the toolbar. So with drawing white, I can reveal details. So anything that I missed from the image, I can reveal. So that's what I normally do. I reveal the parts that I need, and we can zoom much closer so we can be very precise. So now if I switch back again to the black color, I can make my brush size smaller, and I can paint over this detail nicely until we have a perfect selection showing exactly what we need. And now currently I'm using a pen tablet with the pen pressure used for the size of the brush. That's why I can draw so nicely and clearly. Of course, you can do the same with mouse. It might just take a little bit longer, but this is something I would also do at the end, refine my selection until I'm happy with every detail. And of course, her face is just as important as her hair. Although I was concentrating on that, I would spend time on the whole selection outline before I actually consider this a final selection. So once again, if I alt click on the mask, we can see what we achieved. So we have a beautiful hard edge selection on these parts, and we have a soft selection on the hair, also very nicely showing exactly what's necessary. So if this is something that you want to learn more about, I again would like to mention the Selecting People course, in which I talk about these techniques in much more detail. But having started using masking in this video, now we are ready to move on to our probably most important topic in this whole course, the non-destructive workflow, in which I will explain why masking, adjustment layers, and smart objects are so important. We talked about all three in previous videos, but we just mentioned them without really going into detail why we need them and how to use them, especially together. So that will be our next video, the non-destructive workflow in Photoshop.